You don't belong here, not anymore. My daughter-in-law's voice sliced through the crowded dining room, her words sharper than the carving knife she used on the roast chicken. In that split second, surrounded by my son, my grandchildren, and the carefully set table I'd once dreamed would be the heart of our family, I realized something ugly. My place in this home had vanished, replaced by a quiet hostility I could no longer ignore. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, keep watching, because you won't believe how this story ends. While you're here, please subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Stories like this need to be heard, and you might help someone else who feels just as invisible as I did that night. Earlier that evening, I had carried my famous sweet potato casserole to the table, the scent filling the house with warmth and cinnamon, reminding me of all the years I'd poured myself into this family. I'd spent the afternoon cooking, humming along to old Motown songs, pretending I didn't notice the glances my daughter-in-law, Tessa, shot me every time she thought I was taking up too much space in the kitchen. She liked her counter spotless, her routines unbroken, and her husband, my only son, Daniel, to herself. Daniel, as always, tried to smooth things over. "Mom, your casserole is everyone's favorite. We're lucky to have you," he said, but his words felt rehearsed, a peace offering he'd practiced. My granddaughter Lily beamed at me from her spot at the end of the table, and for a moment, I almost believed everything was fine. But Tessa's eyes narrowed as she poured the wine, and I caught the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth. For years I'd convinced myself it was my imagination, that I was being too sensitive, that the awkward silences, the small slights, the last-minute, accidental changes to family plans were nothing more than the growing pains of a new household. As dinner began, Tessa kept up her usual commentary on parenting, work, and how things are done now. She made a point of explaining to Lily and her younger brother Ben why it was important to build your own traditions and let go of the past, never looking directly at me, but everyone understood who her words were meant for. My hands, always steady, trembled a little as I passed the salad. Daniel shot me a quick, worried glance, but didn't say anything. My grandson Ben, who was only 8 and still honest, piped up, "Grandma, will you come to my baseball game next weekend?" Before I could answer, Tessa cut in, her smile too bright. "Oh, Ben, Grandma's very busy these days. I'm sure she has a lot on her plate." I opened my mouth to protest, but Daniel's foot nudged mine under the table, a silent plea not to argue. I bit my tongue and tried to eat, but every bite tasted like dust. Conversation moved on, laughter echoing around me, but I felt like I was peering through a window at a family I used to know. The room was filled with all the signs of comfort, fragrant candles, framed pictures, the hum of the dishwasher, but the air felt tight, every smile forced, every gesture rehearsed. I remembered how, after my husband died, I'd poured my love and energy into Daniel and his little family. I'd helped pay for the down payment on their house, babysat for years, covered surprise bills, quietly made sure their fridge was never empty, always telling myself it was just what mothers did. Tonight, Tessa's words, "You don't belong here," had stripped me bare. For the first time, I saw how easily a heart can break in silence, surrounded by people who used to be your whole world. I replayed every moment that had led to this dinner, every favor I'd given, every holiday I'd hosted, every time I'd stepped aside to not interfere. I realized how invisible I'd become, how my presence was something to be managed rather than cherished. Tessa's resentment, once subtle, had finally become undeniable. When dessert came out, Tessa announced, "This year, I thought we'd try something new. No more sweet potato casserole, let's modernize our menu." She laughed, looking around for support, and Daniel managed a weak smile. Lily's eyes went wide. Ben scowled. I set down my fork, every muscle in my body aching to stand and leave. But I stayed, smiling politely, swallowing the hurt, feeling like a ghost at my own family's table. After dinner, as everyone moved to the living room for coffee, I lingered in the kitchen, washing the dishes alone. I could hear them laughing, Tessa's high, triumphant giggle, Daniel's weary attempts to keep the peace, the children's soft voices rising and falling. I looked down at my hands, cracked and worn from a lifetime of work, and wondered how it was possible to give everything you have and still end up unwanted. If you've ever felt like a guest in your own life, I want you to know you're not alone. There's more to this story, so much more than I could have imagined that night. Don't forget to subscribe, share your thoughts below, and stay with me, because what happened next changed not just my life, but my entire family forever. That night, I barely slept. The words, "You don't belong here," replayed in my mind like a cruel song on repeat, echoing through the empty rooms of my little house. It's funny, people think loneliness means being by yourself, but there's a special kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by family and still feeling like a stranger. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick past midnight, thinking of all the sacrifices I'd made since Daniel married Tessa. My savings, my time, my energy, all quietly poured into a life that no longer seemed to have space for me. At breakfast the next morning, I shuffled through unopened bills, mentally counting what was left in my checking account. I'd dipped into my retirement funds to help Daniel and Tessa when they needed a new car, or when the furnace broke, or when Lily's dance lessons and Ben's therapy appointments piled up faster than they could pay. I'd never once asked to be repaid. That was just what mothers did, at least, that's what I told myself, over and over, whenever the sacrifices began to feel heavy. That Saturday, I got a text from Daniel. "Hey Mom, we might not make it to brunch tomorrow. Tessa isn't feeling great, and the kids have a ton of homework." The message was polite, but it stung more than he realized. We'd made Sunday brunch a tradition after my husband's funeral. At first, they came every week, then every other week, then only on holidays or when they needed something. Lately, it felt like every plan I made was quietly erased, replaced by Tessa's new ideas. Later that afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Green, my neighbor, at the grocery store. She glanced into my cart and smiled, "Stocking up for family?" I hesitated, then forced a smile. "Not this week, but maybe soon." Her face softened. "You know, my daughter barely calls anymore. Once they get married, it's like you lose your place." I nodded, her words stinging with truth. I'd spent so long worrying about Daniel, about whether he was happy, that I'd let my own needs vanish. I'd always believed that love would be enough, that if I just kept giving, one day I'd be invited back in. Back home, I wandered into my small garden and sat on the bench my husband had built for me our last spring together. I ran my hand over the worn wood, thinking about all the Sunday afternoons we'd spent watching Daniel play catch with his dad. Now, even my garden seemed quieter, emptier somehow, as if the life had drained out along with my hope. Sunday came and went with no brunch, no call, not even a message from Daniel. The silence was louder than any argument. I spent the day organizing old photos, sorting through albums filled with smiling faces, birthday candles, and Christmas mornings. I found a picture of Daniel at age 6, beaming with pride as he held up a homemade Mother's Day card. My heart ached. I'd been his whole world once. How did we get so far apart? Monday morning, I woke to the sound of rain drumming on my bedroom window. I tried to busy myself, laundry, bills, cleaning out the fridge, but everywhere I turned, reminders of my family stared back at me. Ben's crayon drawing still taped to the microwave, Lily's forgotten hair clip on the kitchen table, a thank you card from Tessa tucked away behind the coffee filters, written so many years ago that the ink had begun to fade. In the afternoon, I decided to visit the library, hoping a change of scenery might lift my spirits. As I browsed the shelves, I overheard two women talking at the next table. My mother-in-law just won't let go, one sighed. She always has an opinion, always wants to be involved. I wish she'd just back off. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. Was that how Tessa saw me? Was I just one more problem to be managed, an obligation standing in the way of her happiness? When I got home, I found an email from Daniel waiting in my inbox. It was short and careful, the kind of message you send when you're afraid of hurting someone but don't know how to avoid it. Mom, Tessa and I think it might be good for everyone if we spend a little less time together, just until things settle down at home. The kids are busy, and we need to work out our own routines. Hope you understand. The words felt like a punch to the gut. I sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house, and cried until I thought my heart would break. That night, I called my sister Janet. I hadn't told her everything. How could I, when I was still trying to convince myself it was just a phase? But as soon as she picked up, the tears started again. Janet, I think I'm losing them. I don't know what to do. She listened quietly, letting me pour out months of worry and heartbreak. When I finished, she said softly, sometimes the only way for them to learn is for you to stop catching them every time they fall. Her words stuck with me, echoing long after we hung up. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity. For years, I'd made myself small, hoping Tessa would see me as an ally instead of a rival. But I realized then that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. Something had to change. I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and started a list. Every loan, every gift, every bill I'd covered since Daniel married Tessa. Mortgage payments, car repairs, medical bills, school tuition. The numbers stunned me. Over the last decade, I'd given them nearly everything I had, always telling myself it was temporary, always believing they'd be grateful. I stared at the final number, hands shaking. It was time to stop living in the shadows of their life. It was time to reclaim my own. What I didn't know was that everything would soon come crashing down, and when it did, they would finally see just how much a mother's love had carried them all these years. The next week passed in a blur, but the ache inside me sharpened into something I could no longer ignore. For days, I busied myself with chores, but every small reminder, an empty chair at the table, the unused board games stacked in the closet, the echo of laughter from families passing by my window, made me realize just how deep the silence in my house had grown. Grief is strange that way. It creeps in quietly, settling into the spaces left behind when people you love start to drift away, not with a bang, but with a series of gentle absences that add up to heartbreak. I threw myself into small projects around the house. I weeded the garden until my back ached, polished the old family silver I hadn't used in years, and organized drawers that hadn't seen daylight since Daniel was in high school. But every night, as I climbed into bed, exhaustion did nothing to blunt the ache in my chest. I began to wonder if I'd ever really belonged in their world at all, or if I had simply clung to a fading dream because the alternative, letting go, felt too much like giving up. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old paperwork in my study, my phone rang. The number flashed across the screen, Daniel's office. I answered, my heart fluttering with hope. "Hi, Mom," Daniel said, his voice tight, distracted. "Do you have a moment?" I told him I always had time for him. He hesitated, then said, "Listen, Tessa and I are trying to refinance the house, but the bank wants proof of all the payments. You know, the times you helped us out?" His words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I was speechless. Then, quietly, I said I'd look for the receipts. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at the neat stacks of canceled checks, bank statements, and handwritten notes. For years, I'd kept everything organized, a habit left over from my husband, who had always believed that every penny tells a story. As I flipped through folder after folder, I realized just how many times I'd stepped in: the first down payment, the surprise furnace breakdown, the new roof after the hailstorm, Lily's orthodontist bills, Ben's therapy, the ballet classes, the birthday parties. I traced each entry with my finger, remembering the hope and relief on Daniel's face every time I said yes. I gathered the documents, copied what the bank would need, and set them aside. But as I did, I felt something inside me shift. I thought about what Janet had said, that sometimes you have to let your children fall. I wondered if I'd ever really let Daniel learn what it meant to stand on his own. My love for him had always been fierce, protective, a shield against the world's cruelty. But somewhere along the way, that shield had become a crutch, and I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. That evening, as I watered the garden, Tessa showed up at my door without warning. She didn't knock, she never did. Instead, she swept inside, her purse slung over her arm, her expression tight and impatient. "Did Daniel call you?" she asked, barely waiting for my nod. "We need those papers as soon as possible. The refinancing is time-sensitive, and the bank's already given us one extension." I handed her the folder, my hand steady, my voice calm. "Everything you need is there." She took the papers, barely glancing at me, then paused in the doorway. "You know, it would help if you didn't mention to anyone how much you've been helping. People talk. They don't need to know our business." The request stung, but I said nothing. After she left, I stood in the empty foyer, her words echoing in my mind. My help was a secret, something to be hidden, never acknowledged. That night, I sat with my journal, writing down everything I was afraid to say aloud. I wrote about feeling invisible, about the slow erosion of gratitude, about the fear that my grandchildren would grow up never really knowing what I had done for them. I wrote about the longing for kindness, for some small gesture of thanks, for a sign that all the years of sacrifice had meant something. The truth sat heavy in my chest. I had poured myself into a well with no bottom, and now I was empty. The next morning, I awoke early and drove to the lake where Daniel used to fish with his father. The air was crisp, the water still, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. I cried for the girl I'd once been, for the wife I had lost, for the mother who could no longer find her way into her own family's heart. I sat on the old wooden dock, letting the tears fall until I felt lighter, emptier, but also strangely free. On the drive home, I made a decision. I would no longer ask for a seat at a table where I wasn't wanted. I would stop offering help unless it was truly needed. I would stop living in the shadows of other people's happiness. I would build a life that was my own, however small or quiet it might be. And if Daniel and Tessa needed me, they would have to come to me, not just for money, but for forgiveness, for understanding, for the chance to rebuild what we had lost. What I didn't know was that everything was about to unravel, far faster and more painfully than I could have ever imagined. The storm I had feared for years was coming, and when it finally broke, the truth would change our family forever. The first sign that the storm was coming didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors, but with a simple letter from the bank. I found it waiting in my mailbox on a gray Thursday morning, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a political pamphlet. I recognized the logo instantly, my stomach tightening before I even opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, cold and impersonal, stating that Daniel and Tessa's application to refinance had been denied. I stared at the words, tracing the polite phrases that masked a reality I knew too well. They were in trouble, and it wouldn't be long before that trouble came knocking on my door. Sure enough, the call came later that day. Daniel's voice was tight with anxiety, so different from the confident boy I'd raised. "Mom, do you have a minute?" he asked, but before I could reply, he launched into a litany of numbers, deadlines, and mounting bills. "We're underwater on the mortgage. The rates went up again. The bank says our credit isn't strong enough unless we pay off the old debts. Maybe if we could get a little help, just until Tessa's next promotion comes through." The desperation in his voice was raw, his words tumbling over one another like a child trying to explain a broken window. For a moment, I almost said yes out of habit, the way I always had. But something inside me held firm. I asked for details, listened as he explained the missed payments, the growing credit card balances, the tension between him and Tessa that had started seeping into every conversation. He tried to sound optimistic, promising that things would turn around. "We just need a little more time, Mom. Tessa's working overtime. I'm picking up freelance work. If we can get past this month, everything will settle down." I wanted to believe him, but I could hear the fear behind his words, the unspoken worry that this time there might not be a rescue. I told him I'd think about it, promising nothing. When we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, the afternoon sun slanting through the curtains, and let the silence wash over me. For the rest of the day, my phone rang again and again. Tessa left a curt voicemail. "If you care about your grandchildren, now's the time to prove it," her voice brittle, edged with panic. Later, Lily called, her small voice uncertain. "Grandma, Mom, and Dad are fighting a lot. Ben's been crying at night. Will you come over soon?" That invitation, at least, was genuine, untouched by adult pride or desperation. That evening, I drove over with a pan of lasagna, more out of instinct than hope. The house felt different, cluttered, tense, the usual warmth replaced by an air of fragile denial. Tessa barely met my eyes, her words clipped and formal. Daniel hugged me hard, holding on a moment longer than usual, as if afraid to let go. The kids were subdued, their laughter quieter, their eyes darting between their parents, searching for signs of calm. After dinner, Tessa retreated to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Daniel and I sat together in the living room, the glow of the television flickering across our faces. He finally spoke, voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Mom. We never meant for things to get this bad. I thought I could handle it." I reached over, squeezing his hand. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Daniel. But you have to want to change. You can't just keep patching over the same holes and hoping the roof will hold." He nodded, eyes brimming with tears. He tried to blink away. When I left that night, the air outside felt colder, the stars harsh and unyielding. I realized, with a jolt, that I was watching my son's life unravel in slow motion, powerless to stop it unless I surrendered myself all over again. I drove home, heart heavy, mind spinning. I knew that if I bailed them out again, nothing would ever change. But could I really stand by and watch them fall? The next morning, I called my sister Janet for advice. Her words were gentle but firm. "You've carried them long enough, Ellen. Sometimes love means letting people face their own consequences. It's time for Daniel and Tessa to learn how to be responsible, truly responsible, for their family." I hung up, torn between guilt and resolve. That afternoon, as I watered my garden, Ben appeared at my gate, clutching his baseball glove, his eyes red from crying. "Grandma, can we play catch?" We tossed the ball back and forth in the waning light, his small voice breaking the silence. "Are we going to have to move?" he asked quietly. I crouched beside him, brushing his hair from his eyes. "No matter where you are, you'll always have me. That will never change." He nodded, clinging to the promise like a lifeline. As dusk settled, I sat alone on my porch, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and impending rain. I realized the storm had already arrived, and all I could do now was weather it, and hope that somehow, when the winds died down, there would be something left to rebuild. What I didn't know was that the worst was yet to come, and the choices I made in the next few days would define not just my future, but the future of everyone I loved. By Monday morning, the tension had reached a fever pitch. I woke to 3 new voicemails, one from Daniel, his voice tight with worry, another from Tessa, clipped and almost accusatory, the third from the mortgage company, a cold, automated reminder about immediate payment required. The world seemed to be closing in, every reminder of their trouble somehow landing at my doorstep. Despite everything, I found myself driving across town to their house, lasagna pan and a bag of groceries in the passenger seat. Old habits die hard, especially the ones rooted in love and obligation. The front yard looked neglected, grass too high, toys scattered and left out in the rain. Inside, the house felt heavier than ever, as if the air itself was thick with old resentments and new fears. Tessa was nowhere to be seen. Daniel answered the door in sweatpants and an unshaven haze, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "She's at work," he said without preamble. "Picked up a double shift. We're behind on everything." His voice faltered. I stepped inside, set the groceries on the counter, and surveyed the kitchen. Unwashed dishes piled in the sink, unopened mail stacked on the table, Lily's science project half finished among the clutter. In that moment, I understood how far things had truly fallen. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat down with Daniel, waiting for him to find his words. He stared at his hands, knuckles white. I don't know what to do, Mom. Every month we fall further behind. I can't sleep. Tessa and I barely talk without arguing. The kids, they know more than we want them to. He looked up at me, eyes pleading. Do you think we'll lose the house? For a long moment, I couldn't answer. I wanted to lie, to reassure him the way I had when he was a child, but this was different. I don't know, Daniel, I said quietly. You might. But you're not the first to go through something like this, and you won't be the last. You have to face it together, not pretend everything's fine. He nodded, tears threatening. I'm so tired, Mom. I just wanted to stop. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Maybe it's time to stop trying to patch the old life and start building a new one. Smaller, simpler, but honest. You and Tessa need to decide what matters most, what you're willing to fight for, and what you can let go. The truth hung in the air, sharp and unavoidable. Lily and Ben came in quietly, sensing the tension but desperate for some sense of normalcy. We ate reheated lasagna for lunch, the kids talking about school and friends and little things that felt impossibly precious in the midst of such chaos. Afterward, Lily asked, Grandma, will you come to my recital next month? Even if we have to move? I promised her I would, no matter where she was. That afternoon, as I left, Daniel hugged me so tightly I could hardly breathe. Thank you, Mom. For everything. I brushed his hair back the way I had when he was little. You don't have to thank me. You just have to keep trying. I drove home, my mind spinning. I knew I couldn't save them, not this time, not without losing myself completely. It hurt more than I could admit. But somewhere beneath the pain was the stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, Daniel and Tessa would finally learn to stand on their own. That evening, Tessa called me. Her voice was flat, all the sharp edges worn smooth by exhaustion. I know things are bad, she said. I know I haven't always been easy to get along with. But I'm scared. I don't know how to fix this. For the first time in years, I heard something like vulnerability in her words. I wanted to comfort her, to promise that things would work out, but all I could say was, you're not alone. But you and Daniel have to want the same thing. You have to be honest with each other and with yourselves. She was silent for a long moment, then quietly asked, would you watch the kids on Saturday? I need to work, and Daniel has a meeting with the bank. I agreed, sensing that beneath her request was a silent plea for help she could barely bring herself to voice. We hung up, and I stared out my kitchen window at the fading light, wondering what Saturday would bring. The days crawled by, each one heavier than the last. I kept busy, cleaning, gardening, writing in my journal, but the worry followed me everywhere, a constant companion. On Friday evening, Daniel called. The bank wants us to come in together. They said if we can't make a payment by next week, they'll start foreclosure proceedings. His voice broke. We can't afford it, Mom. Not even close. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet, letting the truth settle in. I had done everything I could for my family, given them every chance to build a secure life. Now, all I could do was stand back and let them face the storm. But even as I prepared myself for the worst, I couldn't help but wonder if this crisis might finally be the catalyst for the change we all needed, even if it broke our hearts in the process. Saturday morning dawned gray and uncertain. I arrived at Daniel and Tessa's house just after 8, let myself in with the key they'd once given me with such warmth. The house was quiet but tense, like everyone inside was holding their breath. Ben and Lily greeted me with tired smiles, their backpacks sat packed by the door, as if even they sensed the need for escape. Tessa handed me a list of instructions: snacks, medications, emergency contacts, her voice brisk but her eyes rimmed with fatigue. She paused before leaving, her hand lingering on the doorknob. "Thank you," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. For a split second, her mask slipped, and I saw the scared young woman underneath the sharp words and restless energy. I wanted to reach out, but before I could, she slipped away, her footsteps echoing down the driveway. Daniel came down the stairs in a rumpled shirt and tie, looking 10 years older than he had just a month before. He kissed his kids goodbye, squeezed my hand, and said he'd call when the meeting with the bank was over. Then, for the first time in a long while, I was alone with my grandchildren, just the three of us and the stillness of a house waiting for news. We tried to have a normal day. I baked cinnamon rolls with Lily, helped Ben set up his Lego city, read stories, and played board games in the living room. But even their laughter felt uncertain, a brittle kind of joy that kept glancing toward the door. Every time the phone rang, both children looked up, hope and fear written plainly on their faces. Around noon, I made lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches and apple slices, a small gesture of comfort from a simpler time. As we sat at the kitchen table, Lily pushed her food around her plate. "Grandma, are we going to move?" she asked, her voice wavering. I looked at her, searching for an answer that wouldn't be a lie. "I don't know, sweetheart. But whatever happens, we'll face it together." Ben nodded solemnly, as if trying to convince himself it was true. The afternoon dragged by. We watched the clouds pile up outside, waiting for Daniel or Tessa to come home, for someone to tell us how this story would end. When the door finally opened, it was Daniel. His face told me everything before he even spoke. He set down his briefcase, knelt in front of his kids, and pulled them into his arms. "We have to leave this house," he said, voice gentle but firm. "But we're still a family. Nothing will change that." Tessa followed him in, her shoulders slumped, eyes red. She moved straight to the kids, hugging them tightly, murmuring apologies and promises I knew she wasn't sure she could keep. The four of them sat together on the living room floor, holding each other, the grief of losing their home settling over them like a heavy blanket. I stepped into the kitchen to give them space, the echo of their tears ringing in my ears. I stared at the window above the sink, watched the neighbor's dog chase its tail, tried to remember a time when all of this felt easier, when love and effort alone had seemed enough to keep everyone safe. Later, when the kids had gone to bed, Daniel and Tessa sat across from me at the table. Their pride was gone, replaced by an exhausted kind of honesty. "We have 30 days, Daniel said, voice hollow. "The bank gave us one last chance to catch up, but it's impossible. We'll have to find somewhere else." Tessa added, "We called a realtor. Maybe we can sell quickly and have something left over. I'm looking for extra work, anything, really." She looked at me then, her bravado gone. I never thought this would happen to us. I reached for her hand, surprised when she didn't pull away. "You're not alone in this. But you have to do this together, no more secrets, no more pretending." Daniel nodded, eyes shining with fresh tears. "We're sorry, Mom. For everything. For how we treated you, for taking your help for granted." Tessa's grip tightened. "We know we can't ask for more, but we're scared." I took a deep breath, my own eyes burning. "I'll help where I can, but this time it has to be different. You'll need to make hard choices, give things up, accept help without expecting it." There was silence then, heavy and meaningful. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the start of something honest, something new. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred by my tears, I realized that sometimes, losing everything you thought mattered is the only way to remember what truly does. I didn't know what the next month would bring, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope, fragile, uncertain, but real. The weeks that followed moved with the slow, aching certainty of a season changing. Daniel and Tessa packed the house in silence, sorting through years of memories now measured in boxes and tape. There were long nights filled with paperwork and tears, with whispered apologies and old arguments finally given a voice. The children sensed the finality of every empty shelf, each bare wall, but Lily and Ben proved more resilient than their parents. Children always find ways to hope, even when the adults around them are lost. I spent those days coming and going, helping where I could. I wrapped dishes and folded linens, listened as Tessa confessed her regrets, her anger at herself for letting pride guide so many of her choices. Daniel leaned on me in quiet ways, asking about recipes from his childhood, telling stories of when he was young and the world seemed safer. It was strange to see my son so vulnerable, so willing to let the mask drop. In those moments, I felt our bond knitting itself back together, fragile but unmistakable. One afternoon, as we packed the children's books, Ben looked up at me with wide, anxious eyes. "Grandma, will we ever come back here?" I knelt down beside him, smoothing his hair. "Maybe not to this house, honey, but you'll always have a home with the people who love you." Lily, sitting cross-legged on the floor, clutched a worn teddy bear I'd given her on her first birthday. "Can we stay with you, Grandma? Just for a little while?" Their faith in me, so pure, so simple, broke something open in my heart. I spoke with Daniel and Tessa that night. "The kids are welcome to stay with me for as long as you need. If you both need time to figure things out, my door is always open." Daniel looked at Tessa, his eyes searching hers for consent. She nodded, a tear tracking down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, voice shaking. "I don't know what we would do without you." Moving day arrived in a blur of trucks and exhaustion. Friends from church brought casseroles and boxes, neighbors stopped by to offer awkward farewells. I watched Daniel walk through each room, touching the walls as if saying goodbye to more than just plaster and paint. Tessa supervised the movers, her posture straight but her hands trembling. At my house, the guest room became Ben's domain. Lily set up a little camp on my sofa, and suddenly my quiet home rang with the sounds of life again, laughter and arguments, stories and questions, the busy, healing noise of family. The children's presence was a balm to my spirit, a reminder that I still had purpose, that my love hadn't been wasted after all. Daniel and Tessa moved into a small apartment nearby, a place with thin walls and old carpets but no looming mortgage, no constant fear. They visited every day, sometimes together, sometimes separately, working double shifts, looking for extra jobs, slowly learning to manage with less. Our relationship was cautious at first, as if we were all afraid the old hurts might resurface. But as the days passed, a kind of peace settled between us, a new, unspoken understanding that none of us wanted to return to the way things were. One evening, Tessa showed up at my door with a homemade pie, her first real attempt at baking since she'd married Daniel. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice tentative. "For everything. For not giving up on us. For loving our kids when we couldn't find the energy to." I hugged her, feeling the walls finally begin to fall away. Later that night, as I tucked Ben into bed, he asked, "Are we poor now, Grandma?" The question was so earnest, so unburdened by shame, that I smiled through my sadness. "No, sweetheart. We're just starting over. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do." After the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen, the pie cooling on the counter, and wrote in my journal. I listed all the things we'd lost: house, pride, security. But then, slowly, I wrote down what we'd found: humility, gratitude, forgiveness, and the quiet beginnings of something stronger than before. The journey was far from over. Money was tight, stress still ran high, and not every day ended in reconciliation. But for the first time in years, I felt hope, real, hard-won hope, blooming where only emptiness had lived before. In the weeks that followed, my home transformed in ways I hadn't expected. Every morning, I woke to the sound of Ben's feet racing down the hallway and Lily's laughter bubbling from the kitchen as she helped me make breakfast. There was a gentle chaos to it all: spilled milk, mismatched socks, lunchboxes forgotten on the counter. For the first time in years, my house felt truly alive, filled with the kind of messiness only children can bring. I welcomed the clutter, the noise, the steady hum of hope that had returned to my days. Daniel came by most evenings after work, tired but grateful, always making time to help with homework or read Ben a story before bed. We talked quietly over tea after the kids had gone to sleep, not just about bills or jobs but about memories, old family vacations, the day he'd lost his first tooth, the last summer we'd all spent together before Tessa entered his life. The past, once a source of pain, became a bridge between us, a way to reclaim the closeness that had nearly disappeared. Tessa visited as often as she could, usually on weekends. She brought groceries or little treats for the kids, stayed late to help with laundry or cook dinner. There was still awkwardness between us, old resentments that hadn't fully faded, but her gestures grew gentler, her words more thoughtful. One Saturday, as we sat together folding sheets, she confessed, "I thought needing help made me a failure. But I see now how much strength it takes to ask." The admission surprised us both. I reached for her hand, and she let me hold it, even if only for a moment. With each passing day, Lily and Ben adjusted to their new routines. Ben started at a public school down the street. The first day, he clung to my leg at the gate, but when I picked him up that afternoon, he was grinning ear to ear, his backpack smeared with paint from an art project. Lily missed her old dance studio, but she joined a community center class, and after her first recital, she ran into my arms, face flushed with pride. They both made new friends, learned new jokes, found joy in places they'd never thought to look. We spent weekends at the park, or baking together, or simply walking through the neighborhood, marveling at the flowers pushing up through cracks in the sidewalk. I taught them how to tend my little garden, showing Ben how to pinch back the tomato plants, letting Lily scatter wildflower seeds along the fence. They watched in awe as green shoots broke the soil, small miracles that felt like promises. There were difficult days, too. Nights when Ben cried for his old bedroom, mornings when Lily grew sullen and withdrawn, missing her old friends and the life that was suddenly gone. But each time, we faced the pain together, never hiding it or pretending it wasn't there. I let them see my tears when I missed my husband, let them hear my own worries, so they'd know it was okay to grieve and to hope at the same time. Money was still a constant worry. I kept a strict budget, stretching every dollar, making casseroles that lasted 3 days, turning off lights, saving every spare penny for field trips and birthdays. Daniel worked 2 jobs now, sometimes coming by only to sleep for a few hours on the couch before heading out again. Tessa picked up shifts at a bakery and started taking online classes, hoping to find steadier work. Their pride, once so brittle, had softened, replaced by a quiet determination. Sometimes I caught Daniel watching his children as they played in the backyard, a look of awe and regret mingling on his face. One night, as we stood at the window, he said, "I used to think security meant money, a big house, new cars. But this, being here, knowing the kids are safe, that we're together, it's worth more than anything I ever bought." I hugged him, heart aching with love and sadness. "You're building something new, Daniel. Something that can't be taken away." Spring arrived quietly. The days grew longer, the trees burst into bloom, and the pain of the past began to recede, replaced by cautious optimism. I realized then that our family had not only survived, but grown, each loss replaced by something more precious: gratitude, resilience, the courage to begin again. By the middle of spring, a new rhythm had settled over our lives. The hardest edges of the crisis had worn away, replaced by a gentler kind of uncertainty, a future not mapped out in financial statements or old plans, but in shared meals, whispered encouragement, and long evenings spent simply being together. The grief of losing the old house lingered, but it was no longer the shadow that defined every conversation. Instead, we found comfort in our routines, a fragile security built not on things, but on the people who had survived the storm together. Ben's school sent home a note about the annual science fair, and he asked if I would help him with his project. We spent afternoons in the kitchen building a volcano from papier-mâché and baking soda, Ben's laughter ringing out as the lava bubbled over the countertop. Lily started writing stories in her journal, tales of brave girls and faraway places, sometimes reading them aloud to us at bedtime, her imagination a balm for us all. Daniel, though exhausted, grew lighter in spirit. He found pride in his work, satisfaction in the small things, fixing a leaky faucet at the apartment, coaching Ben's Little League team on weekends, making pancakes for the kids on Sunday mornings. There was humility in his voice now, but also a new sense of purpose, the understanding that love and presence were worth far more than the appearance of success. Tessa was changing, too. She earned her first certificate from an online course, beaming as she showed it to me and the kids. One afternoon, she arrived with groceries, having budgeted so carefully that she had a little left over for ice cream. She apologized again, this time unprompted, for the harsh words and cold silences of the past. I never realized how much I needed to forgive myself, she said quietly as we unpacked the bags. Thank you for being patient with me, even when I wasn't patient with anyone. I told her what was true, that forgiveness isn't a gift you give just once, but a decision you make every day, even when it's hard. That night, over bowls of ice cream, we laughed together for the first time in what felt like years, the walls between us finally crumbling. The kids flourished in their new routines. Ben's volcano won honorable mention at the science fair, and Lily's stories were chosen to be read over the school intercom. They made friends, learned to ride their bikes along the quiet streets, collected wildflowers, and brought them home to brighten the kitchen. I watched them discover joy in the ordinary, a bird's nest in the hedge, the way sunlight filtered through the window, the thrill of saving enough allowance to buy a new set of colored pencils. Evenings became my favorite time. We gathered around the kitchen table, sharing stories from our days, passing plates and laughter, sometimes tears. I taught Ben how to knead bread, Lily how to sew on a button. Daniel and Tessa opened up about their struggles and hopes, no longer hiding their fears behind forced smiles. There was honesty between us now, sometimes painful, but always real. One Sunday, Daniel arrived with a battered box of old family photos he'd found while sorting through storage. We spent hours looking through them, piecing together our history. There were pictures of my late husband holding a baby Daniel, of birthday parties in sunlit yards, of holidays where the whole family crowded around the table. The kids listened wide-eyed as I told them stories, how Daniel had once snuck a frog into church, how Tessa had danced in the rain at their wedding. The past became a bridge, not a burden, and we crossed it together, finding laughter in the places that once held only loss. As spring turned to early summer, the garden we'd planted together burst into color, marigolds, zinnias, tomatoes ripening on the vine. The kids took pride in every blossom, marveling at how patience and care could turn small seeds into something bright and beautiful. I realized then that we were all growing, not just moving forward but truly transforming. The pain had not vanished, but it had made us softer, kinder, more grateful for each other. There were still challenges, money troubles, late nights, the ache of old regrets, but now, we faced them together. Our family, once fractured by pride and misunderstanding, was healing in slow, stubborn ways. In the quiet moments, I gave thanks for all that remained, a home filled with laughter, forgiveness, and a love that had learned to survive even the worst of storms. The first true warmth of summer brought a subtle shift to everything, longer days, brighter skies, and a sense of possibility that none of us had felt for a long time. Daniel's second job offered him a full-time position with benefits, and for the first time in months, he dared to dream about a future that didn't revolve around overdue bills. Tessa finished another online course and was called in for an interview at a local clinic. I watched her iron her blouse in my kitchen, hands trembling, but her eyes alight with a cautious pride. "Do you think they'll like me?" she whispered, and I smiled. "I think you'll show them who you really are." That's enough. The children thrived in the golden stretch of summer. Lily learned to swim at the community pool, and Ben started a collection of rocks and feathers, each one a treasure in his growing world. Some afternoons, we walked to the library, reading in the cool quiet until the sun started to dip low. The world felt bigger again, full of adventures that cost nothing but time and attention. Sometimes, as I watched them run ahead of me down the sidewalk, their laughter echoing in the soft dusk, I caught myself thinking that all our losses had made these small joys shine brighter. One weekend, we held a picnic in the park to celebrate Daniel's new job. Friends and neighbors gathered, bringing homemade food and old stories. For the first time since everything fell apart, I saw Daniel and Tessa stand side by side, their shoulders touching, sharing real smiles. There was still sadness in their eyes, but also something steadier, an acceptance, maybe, or a wisdom that comes only after surviving what you once thought you couldn't. That night, after the dishes were washed and the kids were asleep, Daniel sat with me on the porch, a mug of tea warming his hands. "I didn't think we'd make it through this, Mom," he admitted quietly. "I kept waiting for someone to swoop in and fix it. But now, I'm almost grateful no one did. We had to figure it out for ourselves. We had to grow up." His words broke something loose in me, a pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. "I never stopped believing in you," I told him. "Even when you doubted yourself, I knew you'd find a way." The weeks slipped by in a gentle rush. Tessa got the job at the clinic, her schedule finally allowing for family dinners and lazy Saturday mornings. She brought home stories of patients and new friends, of challenges that made her feel capable, needed. One evening, after Lily's first swim meet, she pulled me aside and said, "I want you to know how much you mean to us. I know I haven't always shown it, but we wouldn't have survived this without you." The gratitude in her eyes was real, hard-won and honest. Money was still tight, but we learned to make do. We picked fruit at the local orchard, made jam from scratch, sewed patches onto old jeans. The kids set up a lemonade stand on the corner, earning enough for a new soccer ball and a pile of used books. There was joy in these small victories, a kind of pride that had nothing to do with what we owned, but everything to do with what we'd learned to value. One evening, Lily asked if we could have a family meeting. We gathered in the living room, everyone sitting cross-legged on the rug. Lily, clutching a sheet of paper, read aloud a list of things she loved about our new life. We talk more. We play games. We help each other. We eat dinner together every night. When she finished, there was silence, the kind that settles when everyone knows they're hearing something true. I tucked her into bed later, brushing her hair off her forehead. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" I asked. She smiled up at me, eyes shining. "I miss our old house sometimes, but I love being here. I love having you close." Her words echoed in my heart long after she fell asleep. That night, I stood in the kitchen, looking out at the garden where the first fireflies of summer danced in the twilight. I realized that, despite everything we'd lost, we'd found something more precious, a way back to each other. We were different now, marked by struggle, but stronger for it, ready for whatever the next chapter would bring. August brought a softness to the air, a sense that something hard had finally eased. The garden blazed with late summer color, and the house felt like it had settled into its new shape, worn in places but bright with laughter. I watched Ben chase Lily across the yard, their shadows long on the grass, and I found myself thankful for the little things, a loaf of fresh bread cooling on the windowsill, the sound of Daniel and Tessa's voices drifting through the open kitchen door as they planned the week ahead. We still had our worries. School supplies needed to be bought, car repairs loomed, and I kept a running list of bills taped inside a kitchen cupboard, each item checked off with satisfaction when we found a way to pay. But the fear that had once stalked every corner of our days was gone, replaced by a sense of control, a belief that together, we could figure out whatever life threw at us next. Daniel and Tessa spent more time at my house than ever before, not because they needed anything but because they wanted to. Sunday dinners became a tradition, each meal a celebration of our survival. Sometimes, after everyone had eaten their fill and the kids had run off to play, the four of us would sit at the table, lingering over coffee, talking honestly about the past and the future. There were moments of regret, memories that stung, but no one turned away from the truth anymore. One evening, Daniel took my hand across the table. "I don't think I ever really understood what you gave up for us," he said softly. "Not just the money or the time, but your own dreams. I'm sorry it took losing so much for me to see that." Tessa added, "You showed us what family means, showed me how much I needed to learn. I hope we can be as generous with our own children." I squeezed their hands, tears blurring my vision, and told them the only thing I could: we start over as many times as we need to, as long as we do it together. The end of summer meant new beginnings for all of us. Ben moved up a grade at school, nervous but excited, his confidence growing with every small victory. Lily joined a writing club and read her first story aloud to an audience, cheeks flushed with pride as she looked for my face in the crowd. Daniel's job became steadier, the threat of layoffs replaced by hope for promotion. Tessa came home one day with flowers for the kitchen table and a pay stub she waved like a flag of triumph. We found ways to give back, too. Daniel volunteered to coach Ben's soccer team, Tessa organized a bake sale for the school, and Lily collected canned food for a local pantry. I saw the change in all of us, a humility born from hardship, a willingness to reach out and offer what we could. The years of taking had finally given way to years of giving. There were setbacks, of course. One afternoon, the old car refused to start, and I watched Daniel and Tessa figure out a solution together, no longer looking to me or anyone else to swoop in and save the day. They argued, laughed, and eventually fixed it, high-fiving over the open hood as Ben and Lily cheered them on. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. That night, after the house had gone quiet, I sat on the porch under a sky freckled with stars. I thought about my late husband, about the promise I'd made to keep our family together. I remembered all the lonely nights, the tears, the worry, and the moments when I thought I couldn't give any more. And yet here we were, together, changed, but unbroken. As a breeze stirred the branches overhead, I whispered my thanks. For the pain that forced us to grow, for the love that wouldn't let us quit, for the grace that found us in the darkness and led us back into the light. The first cool winds of autumn arrived almost overnight, rustling through the garden and sending golden leaves tumbling across the porch. With the change in season came a deeper sense of peace, a knowledge that, after everything we'd survived, we were ready for whatever lay ahead. The children started back at school, Daniel's work became more secure, and Tessa's confidence bloomed as she found herself valued at the clinic, her kindness finally shining for all to see. Our lives had grown simpler but so much richer. Sunday dinners became a ritual, laughter around the table, Ben and Lily showing off drawings and stories, Tessa swapping recipes with me as Daniel recounted tales from his long days at work. The air was thick with gratitude and second chances. There were fewer gifts, fewer luxuries, but what we shared was worth more than anything money could buy. One crisp evening, as the family gathered in my living room, Ben curled up beside me and asked, "Grandma, will we ever have a big house again?" I hugged him close and told him, "Home isn't about how big the house is, sweetheart. It's about who's waiting for you inside." He smiled, satisfied, his worries put to rest for now. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel stood and raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, voice steady and proud. "To forgiveness, to hard lessons, and to family, no matter what." We all echoed his words, our voices blending, each of us feeling the weight and relief of how far we'd come. Later that night, after everyone had left and the house had gone quiet, I sat alone for a moment in the stillness. I thought about all the ways life can break you open, how loss can become a gift, how love sometimes means stepping back instead of rushing in, and how the greatest transformations often start with heartbreak. If you're listening to this story and see yourself in my journey, know that you're not alone. Life will test you, but it can also rebuild you. Sometimes the only way to heal a family is to let it fall apart and trust that, in time, everyone will find their way home again. If my story moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share your own experiences in the comments. You never know whose heart you might help heal by letting them know they're not alone. Thank you for joining me on this journey. For every mother, grandmother, father, or friend who has ever loved too deeply or given too much, remember, you are worthy of kindness and gratitude. And sometimes, the happiest endings are the ones you never saw coming.